to another edition of Hardcap. I'm Brian Jones of Sky Magazine, here with our open correspondents, Nick Rogers to my left, Jimmy Leppert, and as well Zach Smith. We had an exciting day of action. We saw all of the one seeds play out some close, exciting games, but they all held. And let's go over to the most recent one. We saw Central Florida battle out with Wisconsin, and Nick, you got to see that game. Wisconsin ended up on top.
Yeah, I think the reason is twofold. It's their defense and their depth. It's this last game of the day. A lot of teams are going to be tired. Wisconsin, they stayed strong, and UCF got gassed.
It seemed like Alex Simmons was carrying the load on offense there, and it just seemed like Central Florida got tunnel vision at the end, and those Central Florida mistakes really did them in. What did you see by Wisconsin that really pulled it out in the end?
Once again, defense, but on offense, they got the 50-50s. They beat their man down the field, and they made the play.
Mm-hmm. And so we also saw another number one seed have a close game. We saw Tufts versus Carleton. Jimmy, you were covering that game. What did you see in there?
Really, it was Cut came in with a very, very patient O in the first half. They had no turns on offense in the first half, and that's why they were able to take a big lead on Tufts going into the first half. In the second half, Tufts battled back. They came out and they played their game. They came out on defense strong, and they brought it back to 14-12 was the final score. And in the end, it's because Carleton in the second half was really turning the disc. Tufts was throwing a very poachy zone look, and that caused some problems for Carleton's usually very consistent O-line.
Carleton came out on top, but it looks like they may have suffered a massive injury there. I understand one of their top players went down.
Yeah, early in the game, Simon Montague bid for a disc and came down on his elbow kind of weird. Really, he described it to me, it just sounds like a minor tennis elbow. His tendons in his arms just felt really tight. If he gets some compression on that elbow, he should be fine for the rest of the day, and it's on his left arm, so it doesn't affect his throwing motion at all. His throws still came out crisp as ever. He should be fine for the rest of the weekend.
Well, that's good news for Carleton, and hopefully he's good to go. Zach, I understand you got to see the other number one seeds battle it out. You saw Pittsburgh versus Luther, as well as Oregon battle it out with Minnesota. What did you see in those two games?
Well, for the first 1 versus 2 of the day, Oregon and Minnesota were playing, and it was pretty high expectations, with that Centex final being very exciting. Unfortunately, Oregon jumped out to this humongous lead. Minnesota looked tired and couldn't really get anything going. So that was Oregon's game from start to finish. Minnesota just seemed out of it. I believe it was 6-2 at one point, and then Oregon traded to make it 8-4. And Minnesota never really made it a game, as it was 15-9 for the final score. Pittsburgh Luther was another shootout that people were really excited to see. It ended up a few votes behind in the USAU poll, behind Central Florida versus Wisconsin. And that was another game that Pittsburgh just outmatched Luther with their athleticism, with their skill. Luther really relying on their talents, on their individual players. Josh Johnson, Eric Johnson, Peter Graffey just couldn't really get it done. They had a couple huge, great plays early in the game, but couldn't really sustain it, and Pittsburgh walked away with it 15-10.
Looks like we saw a battle of two Callahan nominees go on in that game, and Alex Thorne and Tyler DiGirolamo came out on top. Number one seeds all holding this entire tournament so far, day one. And we're looking around, looking for upsets. Last year we saw a bunch of them with number one seeds. They weren't there, but we did see a couple of upsets today. And I understand, Nick, you were there watching Georgia Tech versus North Carolina. What was the difference in that game for Georgia Tech?
Well, I realize that it's on paper, it's an upset, but I really think with the injury to Sarah McCord, I don't think many people thought that UNC was definitely the better team. Maybe they would have an edge, but a lot of people thought that would bring them down, and it did. They became a little one-dimensional. They relied on Johnson, and it cost them.
Mm-hmm. Christian Johnson, sophomore cutter for UNC, been playing great most of the time. And then also really just looking at Nick Lance and Jay Clark, how well did those guys work together?
Well, I didn't really see a lot of the Jay Clark, Nick Lance matchup, not as much as I would have expected. But Fish was bombing it to Lance all day, full field hucks.
Andrew Fish was moved on to offense at regionals, allowing Nick Lance to get a little bit more versatility and move downfield. I understand we got to go look out at another upset, Michigan State over California on Universe. That was a big game there in Pool D. James, I understand you were there. What did you see?
Really, Michigan State really battled hard. That's what it really came down to on their man defense. Helped cause turns to Cal's offense. It was usually pretty consistent, but Michigan State battled through just like they did at Great Lakes Regionals, and they ended it the same way. On Universe Point, they went out and they got a D, and then just one huck to end it. Caught it wide open in the end zone, and that's what ended on Universe Point. It's a great game to watch. Michigan State, at times they didn't seem like the better team. Cal came out and they were really pushing on O, and Michigan State couldn't keep up on D at times. But then when it came down at the end of the game, Michigan State buckled down on their man defense. Their offense became more consistent, and then in the end, the huck to end it, that's
Ending it in dramatic fashion for sure.
I understand the one of the things that helped turn the tide as Cal seemed to have control of that game early on. Cal actually threw a Callahan for Michigan State to finally take the lead, and that seemed to be the momentum change that Michigan State was looking for. Cal also working it up on Universe Point, ended up throwing into a turnover, and Dave Hochhalter picking up the disc and just sending it full field after all that work for California. Michigan State ends it quickly and able to take the big upset in that pool.
Dave Hochhalter showing shades of the regional final, where he threw a 75-yard bomb against Illinois to win on Universe. Thanks for listening in to another edition of Hardcat. For Nick Rogers, James Lepper, and Zach Smith, I'm Brian Jones of Sky Magazine.